any model that was as successful and could explain as many things as mine did couldn't possibly be terribly wrong. It would have to be at least close. I don't, claim that it can do everything all time. Models evolve. They change. New information comes in and you have new understandings, and the models have to change. They have to grow, or they have to be thrown out. And that's the way it should be. But it finally got to me in 2024 that I just had explained so many things. I had a list of close to 40 paradoxes and things that were explained with this theory that otherwise were unexplainable. And they all weren't in physics. They were in some were in psychology, some were in metaphysics, some were in theology. There are all sorts of these things that it explains very nicely. And I couldn't find in 20 years anything that was a fact, had measurement as part of an experiment, that it couldn't explain.
Keep watching to learn more. You can now download all 9 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, I'm live in my studio with Tom Campbell, who has been a guest on New Thinking Aloud 8 times previously. I encourage you to check our listings. If you haven't watched some of the earlier interviews, check them out. We're going to have an open-ended conversation today covering many different points about his theory, popularly known as MBT, or My Big Toe, toe meaning T-O-E, theory of everything. Tom is the author of the book, My Big Toe. He is also the founder and director of the Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's my pleasure to be here once again in your studio.
This is our 9th interview, incidentally.
Is it? I was thinking it was our 10th, but I may have just miscounted that.
Well, I'll double check. And if I'm wrong, we'll publish a correction. But I do think it is 9. And of course, for viewers who haven't yet watched any of our previous interviews, and there are likely to be some, maybe it would be good to start with just a brief overview.
Okay. Brief is always difficult for me, but I will try my best. Okay. I'm a physicist. And while I was in graduate school, I had an paranormal experience of being able to debug computer code in my mind. And some of that debugging was absolutely impossible to know, even if you were looking at it. It was like the holes in the punch cards were just slightly misaligned. And I could find those in my mind, but you could not find those looking at them. So as a physicist, that was a big mind opener. Well, physics is modeling reality, and there was a whole big piece of reality that had to do with mind that I knew nothing about. So when I left the university, I eventually ran into Bob Monroe, spent 8 years, 15, 20 hours a week with Bob Monroe, learned all the paranormal arts, And my job as the physicist was to come up with the theory of why did it work that way? Why sometimes could you do it and sometimes not? What was the differences? So I spent the next 33 years trying to come up with a model that explained everything. It explained the physical world, but also explained all the paranormal things. And it wasn't an easy task because I would find, okay, I have this piece, I understand this, but that is in conflict with this other piece, which just doesn't seem to have anything to do with this other piece. And it took a long time before I finally pulled it all together. And the insight that helped me pull it together was it's all information. The paranormal things you do is information. The normal things you do are information, which led me to understand reality as a virtual reality just based on information. And from that, I was then, after about another 8 years or so, I'm learning all the time. It takes time. I realized that I could derive quantum physics from an understanding of consciousness. And at first that astounded me. But then when I realized, my understanding is that consciousness is fundamental. And if consciousness is fundamental and you understand consciousness, then you should be able to understand everything else, because everything else is a derivative of consciousness. And indeed, it worked out that way. So I started around 2010, I started looking at science, its mysteries, its paradoxes, and I found that I could explain all of those logically. All of this was science. There are no beliefs. There are no big leaps of assumptions. It's all very basic, very logical. And I can derive quantum physics, and scientists today are stuck on a few things, like that probability wave collapses to a physical particle. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Probability waves are mathematics. Mathematics does not collapse into physical particles. It just is nonsense. Some physicists actually believe that that's what's happening, but most realize that's a metaphor. It's kind of the best metaphor that physics can come up with when they look at how the experiments work. So they say that, but they know it's not really what works. I can explain that logically. I can explain that quantum physics is not weird science. It's rational, logical science, just like every other science. And I do the same with relativity. The big kind of secret, not a secret, but the big thing in relativity is that the speed of light's a constant. Now, that was done in what's called special relativity, which is a real simple little thing. But general relativity basically takes that same idea, but it generates also a theory of gravity. And you come up with space-time, and gravity has to do with the rubbery space-time that warps. So anyway, I can very logically explain why C has to be a constant. In fact, every virtual reality has a constant. So then I started looking for other things in physics that were unknown. They know that this is a fact, but they have no idea why that's a fact or where it comes from. And I could solve all of those, not just some of them, but all of those. So I spent 20 years going between the statement that I had a model of reality to the statement of I had a model not of a reality, but of the reality. And that was about a 20-year journey to go from A to the. But I'm a physicist. I'm careful. I don't like to make claims or say things that I don't have very solid experience and very solid logic to back up. And the reason I made that change is I realized that any model that was as successful and could explain as many things as mine did couldn't possibly be terribly wrong. It would have to be at least close. I don't, claim that it can do everything all time. Models evolve. They change. New information comes in and you have new understandings, and the models have to change. They have to grow, or they have to be thrown out. And that's the way it should be. But it finally got to me in 2024 that I just had explained so many things. I had a list of close to 40 paradoxes and things that were explained with this theory that otherwise were unexplainable. And they all weren't in physics. They were in some were in psychology, some were in metaphysics, some were in theology. There are all sorts of these things that it explains very nicely. And I couldn't find in 20 years anything that was a fact, had measurement as part of an experiment, that it couldn't explain, or that violated it, that said, oh, that can't possibly be true because of. So I changed the A to a D in 2024, and I'm still learning things, of course, as we go. So that's my theory. The theory is basically that this is a virtual reality, and it's computed within consciousness. Consciousness is an information system. And the reason that consciousness system, which of course is conscious, it's not a machine, it's a piece of consciousness. And the reason that it's created this virtual reality for us, which are pieces of this larger consciousness system, I call them IUOCs. Okay? They're individuated units of consciousness. That's what I am. That's what you are. And these consciousnesses are here to evolve, and they evolve by the choices they make. We make choices. I actually define consciousness as awareness with a choice, a very simple definition. And that definition is held up so far through lots of arguments and lots of discussions. That seems to cover it very well. It's just awareness with a choice. So by the choices we make, whether we make them toward becoming love, caring, sharing, cooperation, or we make them because of fear, ego, beliefs, that sort of thing, we then either evolve or de-evolve, depending on which side. Now, that particular dichotomy between fear and love is something that maybe we'll go into later if you want to, but that's kind of another thing. But that's not because I think love is a wonderful thing and that fear is a bad thing. It's because the logic demands that that is the direction in which consciousness evolves. So it creates this virtual reality to give us opportunities to make very meaningful choices, not just choices of who to talk to and what to say, but life-changing choices, life-threatening choices. And we have choices every day, big and small. And each one is an opportunity for us to make those choices based on caring, sharing, cooperation, love, or to make them based on fear, self-centeredness, what's in it for me, that kind of a thing. And the very last thing I'd like to point out is that the dominant attitude in our country and probably in the entire world is that this reality is physical. It's called physicalism and sometimes materialism. And that is that this physical reality is what there is. Now, that comes with an ethic. If physical world is what it is, then physical world doesn't belong to anybody. So if you have the power to grab a piece of it, whether it's minerals or water or whatever, and own it and keep it, then it's yours. And that's true of everything in the physical world. Even the plant kingdom does the same thing. They all grow trying to find sunlight. And if you can grow faster and taller, then you will survive, and the plants that can't keep up will be shaded out. They don't survive. Our physical reality evolves on procreation and survival. That's competition. So that's the nature of this reality. And we as consciousness, that's not what our criteria are. Our criteria are love versus fear. That's how we evolve, is moving toward love, and de-evolve, moving toward fear. So anyway, we have this ethic of control, power, force in the physical world. From plants to humans, that's just the way we are here. And that ethic, of course, can be all summed up in terms of money. Money is control, power, and force. Now, the ethic in my model, the ethic in this model of consciousness is the computer, it computes a virtual reality, and we, pieces of that system, then play and make choices in this virtual reality, and by those choices we evolve or de-evolve. Okay, so that's the overall model. That's the kind of the result of it, is that the ethic that goes with my model is sharing, caring, cooperation. So control, power, force, that goes with materialism. Sharing, caring, cooperation, love, that goes with the MBT model of reality. And that makes a really big difference, because this underlying ethic of control, power, force, that's how we live our lives. And just look at the world and see the news, and it's all about control, power, force. That's what creates all of our problems, whether it's a bank charging fees for no action. They just make up a rule that says, oh, if this happens, you owe us money. And they collect the money but don't really have anything to do. They didn't add any value to it. It's just collection from, that's greed. Well, greed is a part of control, power, force. So we have the world we live in now based on control, power, force. And if even 10% of our population had the ethic of sharing, caring, and cooperation, the world would become a very different place, because that 10% would be more productive, more happy, more satisfied, and have more fun than the other 90%. And very soon, that other 90% would want to be like that very successful 10%, and it wouldn't be but a decade or two before that would be the dominant ethic, and we would all live in a kinder, gentler, more efficient, and more productive space. So that's really my model, and where it goes and why it's significant. So my work is to try to move these ideas forward, and hopefully one day we will live in a kinder, gentler place.
That's a very good summary. And of course, let me also encourage viewers who want to dig more into it. Our previous 8 interviews go into many of the nuances and details, and also many questions that viewers have offered as well. But one idea that I think is important to your theory that you didn't mention that I really like to go into today is the role of entropy.
Mm-hmm. Well, entropy is a physics term, comes out of thermodynamics, and entropy says, well, entropy in the physics viewpoint is that entropy always increases or stays the same. Now, if that's just natural, system left alone, entropy always increases. If you put energy into that system, you can actually have energy decrease. But when you stop putting energy into it, it starts to increase again. So that means that the universe will one day be, hydrogen gas and elementary particles, because that's what happens when everything, goes to as simple a state as possible. But that's going to be a long, long time away, so it's nothing to be too concerned about. Many, many billions, maybe even billions of years. But in any case, entropy as a measure of disorder. So lowering entropy creates order. Now, an information system will have maximum entropy, maximum disorder, if all the bits in it are random. That's the very definition of randomness. There is no information. But that system, given that it's a conscious system, if it can order some of those bits, then that ordering becomes information. It could be a symbol for something. It could be an idea. It could be mathematics. You pile one bit on another bit, and there's 2 bits in a pile. Well, another 2 bits in a pile make 4 bits. So you can turn that ordering into information. So you see that consciousness is an information system, and that makes sense because we are conscious, and what are we conscious of? We're conscious of the information that we collect through our senses. Take away that information, and we are simply aware that we're aware and nothing else. See nothing, smell nothing, hear nothing, feel nothing, taste nothing. And you're just aware that you exist, kind of the Descartes moment where you exist. I am. That's all you know is I am. That's it. So that is the definition of an information system. You take in information, You process it. You compare it to memory. You process it some more, and you have an output. What are you going to do about what you sensed? And that defines an information system. Input, processing, memory, processing, output. So the way consciousness works is as an information system. Now, consciousness, being an information system, it evolves by lowering its entropy, that is, creating meaningful, significant information. So that's how it evolves. It de-evolves by raising entropy, which means dysfunctional behavior, tearing apart, disintegrating, being uncooperative, uncaring, self-centered. All those things are destructive. Now, once you have a system like ours, like our conscious system, which you have the main system, and then you have all the pieces of the system, small replicas of the larger system, that's us, individuated units of consciousness, you have a social system. That creates a social system. And in a social system, it's pretty obvious, I could go through a little derivation, but it's pretty obvious that in a social system, that social system can optimize itself if all of its members cooperate, care, work together for the benefit of everybody. Okay, now this is not necessarily collective, like you think of collective. It's just everybody wants to. They're not forced to. Everybody wants to. They desire to be helpful, to be useful, to share, to care. Nothing's forcing that action. They just simply, that's the way they are. They're low entropy beings. So that then tells you that the way consciousness evolves is toward lowering its entropy. So that's how entropy fits in. Now, lowering that entropy means not just to you personally, because that's your entropy of your consciousness, but in the long term to the whole system, to both you and the system. So when you make a choice, then you have to think, how does that affect the entropy? Is this going to be a choice that helps order, helps the process, helps people learn, helps people grow, helps you learn and grow, and in the long term, it will be a overall good thing. And if that's your conclusion, then you do that. You make that choice, and then you watch and see what happens. If what happens is really good, well, you made a good choice. Pat yourself on the back and make more of those good choices. If it didn't work out because, there were some things I didn't think about. I didn't realize that this was going to trigger that, which would trigger this other thing. And you realize, I didn't have enough insight to the problem. And then you find, why didn't you have insight to the problem? What was missing? What should you have done instead? And you learn from it. And that's why we're here. We don't have to be perfect. Making a mistake is perfectly okay. Not learning from that mistake is a bit problematical. But the only punishment for not learning is you get to do it again and again, and you get to doing the same sorts of things until you do finally learn. So that's your punishment for not getting it and learning right away, is that you get to try again and try again and try again. So that's the nature of the consciousness system. All the piece parts are here to evolve. We need this virtual reality because this virtual reality has very gripping, very meaningful, very powerful lessons, challenges all the time. And because this is a multiplayer game, then we all interact with everybody else. I do things that affect you, and you do things that affect others. And our own actions have ripples that go out into the world. And that creates a huge mixture of chances and challenges for us to deal with all of that, because everybody has free will. Remember, it is awareness with a choice. Choice requires free will. If there is no free will, there really is no choice. So that comes in. And of course, the other thing that comes in is time. Because if you can evolve, then it's before you evolved and after you evolved, or before you went to memory, or before you processed and after you processed. So you have to have time. So my model says that time, free will, and consciousness are all logically necessary for each other. The opposite end of that, the direct opposite, you have materialism, which, if you're logical, requires determinism. With determinism, you have no time. Everything just is. There's no evolution. There's no change. There's no growth. There's no degeneration. Everything is just already determined, and there's no point or purpose either, because it doesn't go anywhere. It just happens because it happens. So to me, determinism is kind of the zero order, guess, because it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't accomplish anything, and it has no moving parts. It just is, and it is totally without function or form or purpose. So the idea that time, consciousness, and free will create something that is rather large and beautiful, and it's a game that we all come here to play. You can call it a entropy-reduction trainer, is what this virtual reality is. And this virtual reality is not just Earth, it's the whole universe. And it was created by starting with initial conditions and having a rule set. And then you punch the run button, and you get what I call the big digital bang. That initial conditions was that ball of plasma, high temperature, high pressure. Hit the run button, it starts to expand and cool according to the rules. Rules are things like gravity, and forces and all that sort of thing. So that's done in a computer. It's the big digital bang, and it evolved in the computer. And we have things like that going on in computer science,
And when you say computer, you're really referring to not a computer that some alien in another star system has that we live inside of. You're referring to what my friend Simon Dwan would call the Platonic computer, a computer that exists in a realm outside of our 3D space.
This is the larger consciousness system, an information system, configuring part of itself to be a computer. Information systems make computers. That's what they are. So it can take a part of itself, configure that as a computer, and it can compute this virtual reality. So it's all a part of consciousness. Now, talking about the physical and the non-physical, of course, it creates a virtual reality that we think is physical. So think of a game, a virtual reality game, where there are players and there are avatars. Okay, now to the avatar, say a barbarian in some sort of virtual reality game, that barbarian's viewpoint sees that the computer that's computing it is non-physical to that barbarian. The player is non-physical to that barbarian. And the player makes all the choices for that avatar. That's the way it works. Well, that's exactly the way it works with us. We have consciousness, which is non-physical from our viewpoint. That's the computer. We have the player that is a piece of consciousness. Now, you can call that piece of consciousness a soul. You can call it a spirit. It's non-physical to the virtual reality perspective. So we call that non-physical, as opposed to physical, which is our perception of this virtual reality. And the way that works is like any virtual reality game, and that is that we get a data stream. The data stream is sent to us from the computer, the consciousness system. We get that data and we interpret it to be this physical reality. So there's the data, and then there's our interpretation of the data, and that interpretation is our reality. So everybody lives in a slightly different reality because they have different interpretations based on their different experiences through life.
But most fundamentally, for example, for a typical viewer, a typical person out there, they experience themselves as being a body.
Yes.
And what you're saying is that while we think of this body as being objectively real and physical, it's actually a data stream coming into our consciousness.
Yes, exactly. When you play a virtual reality game, you get a data stream coming into your computer. That data stream lights up, say, 1 million pixels on your monitor. You look at those 1 million pixels, and each pixel has a position, it has brightness, and it has color. That's it. So you get 1 million of these pixels, and you look at those pixels and you see people, you see rivers and rocks and doorknobs and buildings and other beings like yourself. You can see yourself. So what you take that data, you interpret it. You interpret 1 million dots of light into trees and rocks and water and physical things. Well, we do the same. We get a data stream. We interpret that data to be rocks and streams and houses and doorknobs and all the things we find in the physical world. And how do we learn to interpret that? Well, we start as an infant. Somebody says, Mama, and you learn who that is. And somebody says apple, and you learn what that is. And eventually, we have a way of interpreting the data. And that's what we do. So our reality is interpreted information that we get. Now, if you have this understanding, then suddenly all the paranormal things, even the theological things, what's soul, what's spirit, what's going on in the non-physical, how are paranormal things accomplished, and what about the UFOs that are traveling at Mach 2 and suddenly do a 90-degree turn and they're still going Mach 2? How is that possible? Well, it's a virtual reality. It's computed, and the system can compute anything it wants if it thinks that's advantageous to us to help us lower our entropy.
Now, I'd like to drill down a little more into the issue of entropy, because I get the impression that you're saying that high entropy, which pure randomness, that's bad, but low entropy is good. And I wonder about that, because zero entropy would be a crystal, something that's completely frozen, has no choice, has no movement. It seems to me that there ought to be a sweet spot somewhere in between absolute total entropy or zero entropy.
Well, one thing that you're missing is that you can't get to zero entropy. You can only approach it. It's sort of like you can't get to absolute zero in temperature, because just the act of measuring it will warm it up to something bigger than zero. You can't get there. It's sort of like infinity. You can't really get to a place called infinity. You can only approach it. And you can approach it asymptotically. You can get closer and closer, but you don't get there. So you don't get to zero. Now, lowering entropy means that you're helpful, you're caring, you try to help out. There's always people that need that help and need us. There's always something to do. Now, yes, in a physical crystal, it forms a very specific set of angles and planes and faces and so on. That is, it's low energy way of configuring its molecules.
Yeah.
So it does this, but you have to put energy in to get that lowering of the entropy into that crystal. Now, with consciousness, it's the same thing. If you don't keep trying to be low entropy, if you don't keep trying to be helpful and caring, your entropy will increase just all by itself, because you're not putting any effort in. You can only lower entropy by putting energy into the system. If you do nothing, you begin to de-evolve. So you have to keep practicing, keep doing. You never get to the point where you say, I'm done, I quit. I don't really give a damn about anybody else because I'm here and I'm enlightened and I'm done, so I can just forget about the rest of it. That's high entropy. Instead, you'd say, I want to help. I want to be part of the solution. How can I help best?
I totally get what you're saying from an ethical point of view, but to attach it to entropy, that's where I'm not sold on that at all. It seems to me that, true, you're not going to get to total pure entropy or total pure negentropy, but I'm not sure that the ideal is to even be close, even to be very, very close to zero entropy, I think would be confining. And we see lots of instances of rigid organizations where people are functioning, well, for example, churches, religious organizations. Some of them are thousands of years old or centuries old, and they have routines, and people within that organization are relatively harmonious with each other. But every now and then people feel a legitimate need to break out of that structure, which involves increasing entropy.
No, it doesn't work that way. I see your point. But if you have that example of religion and you have that example of doctrine and things that they do and rituals that they do and so on, only if those things are helping people, if those things are helping people grow, helping people become love, if those are just rituals that people do because they do them and because somebody taught them to do them, that has no value. That is not low entropy. That is high entropy.
Well, according to your definition.
Yes. Now, my definition of entropy has not only, it's not just whether the particles are moving, faster or slower. That's more of the thermodynamic viewpoint. Mine has to do with the significance, the value of what you do. So if the things you do cause people to grow and are helpful in the long term, then that's lower entropy. If they cause dissension and disruption and tear things apart, then that's high entropy. Now, if you have something like a ritual that you just do because you do it, there's no value in that. It's not helping. It's not making anybody better. And even though the people do that, and maybe their ritual is to pray 10 hours a day, well, if that's not really helping others, particularly, it's not about self. Love is about others. If that's not really helpful in the world, it's just something you do, then that is not a low entropy process. That could be maybe neutral. You may not be hurting anybody either, but you're not actually helping. You're not part of the solution. So entropy has to do with the significance, what you contribute, what you, I guess, it's a measure of your ability to be helpful and cooperative with other people.
Wouldn't it be fair then to say that you're working with a definition of entropy which is outside of the way it's used normally in physics?
Well, yes, in just some aspects, but in many aspects it's exactly the same. You don't get to zero. Energy always has to go in. If you don't do anything and let it sit, entropy increases. All those things are the same as the entropy. Now, in thermodynamics, it's about heat for the most part. It's about temperature and heat. And yes, eventually, if things get hotter, then everything's bouncing around and there's more chaos involved, right? And things get smaller. And if you take a system down to absolute zero temperature, you get no entropy. That is a very narrow definition about the physical world. And no, mine is not about that. It's not about heat generated by the people, who are doing good deeds. It's not that. But it's very, very similar to entropy and most of the attributes of entropy as in thermodynamics. But here, the way you lower entropy isn't by freezing things. The way you lower entropy is by becoming love, caring and sharing. You see, so it's not the action. You see, it's not the behavior that counts. It's the intent behind the behavior that counts. So, yes, you can have, let's say you are very kind. You act very kind. Every time you see someplace you can help, you just jump in and help because you think that's the right thing to do. Well, that's acting kind. It's different than being kind. If you act kind, that doesn't lower your entropy much. It may lower it a little bit because you are being helpful, but to lower your entropy, you have to be kind. And that then gains you points in this virtual reality game where you level up if you've been, being kind and being helpful and being supportive, then you evolve to a higher state. We just call higher state a lower entropy state. And the next time you go around in this virtual reality entropy reduction trainer, you start with the level of entropy that you have earned up to this point through sometimes evolving, sometimes de-evolving. So you start wherever you are. So it's a progression that builds. Now, thinking about, well, what's the end point? Where do you go? Where does it hit so close to zero that there's nothing going on anymore? Well, the way it works is that the more you contribute, the more that you care and help, the more choices there are. The bigger the thing gets. So you take a whole bunch of people and all they do is stand around and look at each other. Then nobody does anything. Well, that will degenerate very quickly. Everybody will starve to death eventually. So if you help, if you cooperate, if you build, then you create more choices. There's only a certain number of choices if you're constrained to just standing there. But now you can do these things. So the more you go toward lowering entropy, the more possibilities there are for you to move into, because you create something more useful, more functional, which creates more things that you can do. So evolution is just an open-ended process. And the more you evolve down that process, the more spaces there are for you to evolve into, because the more choices you have. So it doesn't get to the point where everybody says, we're done, stop, it's too near zero. You're always expanding, you're always growing. Now let's say that everybody that's in this game on Earth here, everybody gets to be a very low entropy being. So then what's next? Well, we'd have to learn how to care and be nice to each other. And then there's all sorts of things that could happen. One, you could go to some other reality frame. Maybe this frame would have done as much as it could do. You'd go to a different reality frame. Or you might find out that there's this bunch of aliens from some other part of the universe, and they look like lizards with great big teeth. And now you have to learn to love them and interact with them too, just like you had to interact with other humans who weren't nice. So now you have a whole new set of challenges. So the system that's creating this can create anything it needs to perturb the system to be full of challenges. So the challenges are basically unending. The system is a virtual reality. It can create challenges. It can create challenges just in natural behavior. Earthquakes create a lot of challenges for people. It could be any sort of thing. So it's not like you run out of possibilities because you've done everything that can be done. Things to be done keep getting bigger and bigger as you evolve. So you don't get to that stale point where nothing can happen anymore.
In an earlier interview, I referred to you as a prophet of love. And I think that's true. I think that your description of people's ethical behavior is spot on, truly. But I have to say, I still think that equating high ethical behavior with low entropy and the reverse it's a misuse of physics. That's what I think, because it strikes me that high entropy or higher entropy also involves more choices for people. In fact, there's a whole school of thought called chaos magic, which suggests that as conditions become chaotic, there are more opportunities for choice and for change and growth.
There are different opportunities, I would say, not more. There are different opportunities. Yes, chaos theory is one that if you have chaos, that within that chaos you'll have little islands of smoothness, little islands of low entropy. And those islands will move around, and chaos will sometimes come and overrun that, but another little island will pop up here. And I can explain why that works and how it works that way. That's another one of those mysteries that this model does. Yes, that's true. Now, I said my entropy is just a little different. It's not exactly the same, but it has most of the attributes. But one of the things that's different about it, it's not just what you do. It's not your action. It's your intent. You see, that's different. Now, intent is a non-physical thing. So we take it out of the realm of the physical here. Intention is what the consciousness does. So we step outside of the physical world. Now, that's a little different than the entropy of physics. So intention is the key. Again, acting is civilizing, but being is, lowers the entropy so much more. So it's got a non-physical component. It has an interpretive component in that it has to do with the significance of what you do. If you do something nice, you help a mouse escape a trap or something, well, that's good. That's very nice. But if you save a whole building full of children, that's maybe even better, particularly if there's a lot of risk in it to yourself. There was no risk in freeing the mouse, but there's a lot of risk in going, say, into a burning building and helping people get out. So depending on what you do, what's involved in it, the risks you take, how hard or easier it is, and all of these things are subjective things. These are not things that science quantifies. That determines your entropy. So in this way, my entropy is different. It's custom made to fit this theory. Has components to it that are non-physical, like intention. It has components that are not quantifiable, like difficulty of the problem and how much growth did it make you come. If you're a really high entropy person and you do some really amazing, wonderful thing, well, that's a bigger step than if you were able to do real amazing things and you just did another one. Well, that's not so much growth, you see. So it's different than the physics entropy, but it has much of the same attributes as entropy, and there really isn't any better way to describe it because it has the idea of you have to put in work to lower the entropy. If you don't, it increases. It has to do with order. Information is order. Order has to do with lowering entropy. So there's so many parallels to it. I just call it entropy, but it is my own version of entropy. It is not just taking the physics version. But the concept of entropy fits it so well that I use that rather than make up something else and try to give it a new name and call it, that just would be confusing. Yeah. I think more confusing than using the word entropy.
I get a little sensitive about it because as a parapsychologist, we use terms from physics. Non-locality is becoming a very popular term now to explain paranormal things. And I'm aware of the fact that some physicists think we're taking a term from their domain and applying it to our domain, but in a different way. We're misusing their term from their point of view. So I just wonder if that's a good thing to do or not.
I think that is a good thing to do. Particularly in English. The English language is a language that requires interpretation. If you take a page of German or a page and a half of Spanish and convert it into English, you only get a half a page. English is a much more compact language, and that's because those other languages tend to spell out every detail and nuance, and we don't. English requires the listener to guess, to use clues. What's the subject about? What does he mean by using that word? And that's the nature of our language. It tends to be supportive of you taking words and using them in a way that is meaningful to you, and others just have to understand that, okay, you're a physicist and you're talking about non-locality, and that's a very specific thing in quantum mechanics. And you're using it in a general way, which means non-locality, it happens somewhere with no cause. You do this here and somewhere else you get something and it's non-local. You can't see the arrow of causality going from here to there. Is basically what that means. Well, that's a perfectly legitimate way to talk about non-locality. Now you have non-locality means a couple of things. That's not a problem in English. We have that all the time. There's a bear, and bear. They're all the same words and they all mean totally different things. So it's just typical in English that you use words and phrases that convey something that you're trying to explain. And as long as you tell people, this is what I mean, this is what I'm trying to convey. I'm trying to convey that I do something here, and with no error of physical causality, something else happens somewhere else or in some other way. And that's what I mean by non-local. There's not a local cause and effect to make that happen. So you explain that, then it's a perfectly good term, and the physicists will just have to get over that people have hijacked that term, given it a slightly different definition, but it's a good way to describe it. If you had to describe it in another way, it would probably be more clumsy. It wouldn't work as well. So I would say the same thing with entropy. I use that, and I explain what I mean, and so on. And, get over it, guys. It's just using a word that has a lot of the same properties as the words you use, which makes it convenient because people can understand it more easily. If I try to redefine something and call everything, something different, now it's a very difficult concept to understand. But most people get entropy. They understand that immediately. Higher entropy, things fall apart, it's disintegrating, it's going to hell in the ion basket, right? And low entropy, things pull together and work better. They have more form, they have more function. And when you think of that as a social system rather than a crystal, then it makes a lot of sense. People working together can do more than any one of them could do by themselves. All of them working by themselves will not provide the value that people working together can provide. And that's pretty obvious. You don't really have to explain that to people because anybody can just think about that and say, yeah, that's right. So cooperating, caring, working together is low entropy, easy to understand. So I would say that the physicists need to get over their thing about this is my word and you can't use it. Mm-hmm. Of course you can use it, as long as you define it and you understand the differences and it means something rational to you and it's a perfectly good description. It's the way our language works. Maybe in German they would force some more rigor to things, but English is full of things like that, where you have the same word means 2 or 3 or 4 different things, and we have words that are spelled exactly alike, but they're 2 different words, tear and tear. You tear something apart and you have tears, and it's T-E-A-R, it's the same thing. So we have lots of these things that in English that are understandable by context. You get the context of what's being said, you can decide whether it's a tear or a tear when you're reading it. It doesn't confuse people. Oh, she wiped her eyes because of all the tears? No, it doesn't make any sense. Tears? Okay. And you go with that. So it's just the way our language is. And I think it's a very good way. It's a very flexible and very compact, but it's not real precise. And that's why we have to talk and communicate and write and, make it so that people will understand what we're saying.
And it's also, I suppose, important for our viewers to understand, if they don't already realize, that your model is a descriptive model that you wrote out in the English language, you lecture in the English language, and it's non-mathematical.
Yes, it is. And the science of biology is exactly the same way. Darwin got on his boat, the Beagle, and, 4 years he went around, and what did he do? He observed. He took samples. And then he looked at those samples and said, well, how did they correlate? Why do we get this one and this one's a little different and that's a little different? And after looking at what he collected, the facts that he put together, then he came up with a theory of how they correlated with each other, and he called that evolution. They evolved from here to here. So he comes up with a theory. That's not mathematical. Now, you could maybe put some statistics in it, but it's really not mathematical. Science does not have to be mathematical. Science has to be logical. And some science, like biology, is not real mathematical. It's observational. You observe it, you find patterns, you find correlations, and you come to conclusions, and you make theories. And that theory may be proven wrong or may be proven right. It may be stronger or weaker over time, but that's how it grows. So biology is also a science. I don't think anybody would say biology is not a science because it's not mathematical. Observation and being logical about those observations is good science. So that it's non-mathematical. Now, you tell that to a physicist and they'll probably object, because They only function within the physical world. Mathematics is nothing other than the logic of quantity. Quantities have their own logic. One here, there's two. And you can actually reduce math to logical statements. This set and that set and so on. So it's the logic of quantity. The physical world is all about quantity. Physicists will tell you if I can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Because it means if I can't measure it, means I can't interact with it. And if there's something I can't interact with, then that's mysticism. That's something else. So if it's not measurable, if it isn't physical, you see, if it's not in terms of quantity, measurable quantity, then it's irrelevant or doesn't exist. So, of course, if you're describing the physical world, it's going to be mathematical. That's obvious. And that's some big mystery in philosophy. Why is it that our science of the world and the way it is so mathematical? Well, it's quantity. Mathematics is the logic of quantity. Of course it's mathematical. But saying there can't be anything else that's rational or makes sense or logical, that's not mathematical, is nonsense. Look at our world, where we live. There's this objective world. I would correlate that with the props on the stage. And then there's this subjective world, and that's all the ideas in the minds and the interactions of the players that are playing out of play on the stage. Well, which is really more important? Do people come to watch the props? No, they come to watch the actors and hear what they say and what they feel and how they interact and what the story goes. Our subjective life is much more rich, much more varied, much more meaningful. That's where love and caring and justice and beauty and all those things are subjective. All of the things that are most important to us tend to be in the subjective world. Over here on the objective world, it's all the stuff. All right, there's a lot of wonderful things there. There's computers and cars and, rocks and rivers. But that's the stuff. That's the props. Nobody goes to watch the props. The real action is in the subjective world. So to say this objective world that's mathematical, that's the only real thing, and that's where all the action is, and everything else is a hallucination, that's nonsense. That's the small part. That's the little part of our life, is the stuff we have to live with. The big part of our life is things like relationships, right? That's not physical. That's all in the subjective world. So to say that if it's not mathematical, it's not going to be science, is to say science relegates itself to just the physical world. Science can't study consciousness. Science can't study, psychology isn't really a science because they're not measuring things. They're measuring attributes. So, yes, you have your hard sciences that are the real sciences, and then you have all your social sciences that aren't really sciences at all. Well, that's a very biased view from people who just limit themselves to mathematical facts of the physical reality. But my point is that's not what's important to us. That's not what's significant. And science can play in the subjective. Science isn't just mathematical things that are objective. Science is what Darwin did. Science is what biology does. You look at the facts, you collect information, and you see the correlations, you see the significance, you come to conclusions, you come up with theories, you test the theories, and so on. That is also science. And the physicists need to also apply their quantum physics and other things to consciousness as well as other things. They need to look at it from a scientific perspective. Okay, we have paranormal things. Well understood. They've been done 1,000 times in 100 different labs all over the world. Yes, people can remote view. It's not is that real? Can they really do that? There's so much information out there, so much study, so much good protocols. Of course, it's a thing. Now, why wouldn't science want to say, we don't understand that. Let's just try to study what the logic is. But they don't. They say, not in our ballpark. We don't do that.
Well, I think that's changing.
It's changing, and that's wonderful. It is changing. I'm trying to help make it change. I've got a bunch of physicists together at CUSAC that are going to work on consciousness. And I think that's a breakthrough all by itself.
CUSAC, once again, is the Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness.
Yes. So we need to get our scientists out of get them thinking out of the box. Science is logic, not math. And logical, my model is logical. My whole model is just built on logic, just like Darwin's and just like biology. It's mostly observational, and then the logic of how these observations connect with each other and what do they mean. So science needs to break out of its prison that it's made for itself, which is being materialistic. That's a prison. They can't look or study anything else. If it were up to the physicists, there'd be no biology. We'd still be bleeding people with leeches or something. But science can be done in the subjective world just as well as it can be done in the objective world.
I concur.
Yeah, but you need statistics. You need, the sample N to be hundreds of thousands rather than 100. The number of subjects in a particular test. And so there's some things that are hard to do. It's not as cut and dried as the physical objective world, but it has much more rewarding and much more valuable, because that's where our value is in our lives.
Let's talk about synchronicity. I presume, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that when synchronicities occur that are very striking, you would probably suggest that it is an information stream that is directed to us from the larger consciousness system.
That is the case. In most cases, it's the way it is. Some cases, it's just part of the way the structure of consciousness works. But it's the general way to think about it is that the larger consciousness system sees somebody who's close, or at least working on learning something. By that I mean growing up, lowering their entropy. And they see that if they just had this little fact or that little fact, or met this person, or read that book, or had enough money to go there, and take that course, then they could take a big step forward. Mm-hmm. Now, because when we lower our entropy, the entropy of the whole system's lowered because we're part of that system. So the system itself has has good cause to help us learn and grow, because it helps it evolve as well. So there are people that I call persons of interest to the larger consciousness system. Those people are the people who are growing. They're trying to be more positive. They're trying to be more caring and more helpful. They're trying to let go of fear and ego. They're making an effort to be a contributor and not just a user. And these people then are on a growth path. And they're persons of interest to the larger consciousness system. And if the system can do something that hides in the probability someplace, so it doesn't create a problem or some kind of dysfunction, then it can help. It can do things. It can nudge things to being to help that person maybe meet a challenge that they really need to meet, or get a book that they really need to read that fills in some information that they desperately don't have but they need. And those synchronicities happen to people who are trying to grow. Now, let's say you don't care about growth. You don't understand why you're here. You think the reason you're here is to have as much fun as you can, how many parties you can go to, or whatever. Then you're not a person of interest, and synchronicities don't happen to you very much. On the other hand, if you're a person of interest and you really are growing, synchronicities happen to you all the time, every day, 2 or 3 times a day. Everything you really, really need falls at your feet just as you need it. And yes, if that happened once, you'd say, well, that was good luck. But if it happens daily, monthly, it's part of your life that what you need falls at your feet just as you need it. You realize it's part of a plan. It's part of a structure. It's not just random occurrences. So people who are growing in our low entropy, they just seem to be very lucky and lead charmed lives, because just the people they need to meet, just the books they need to read, just the the things they need to know about just come to them just as they need to know them. And that's the system nudging us because we're trying to grow up. So, yes, there was a book about that, back in the 70s or something, about synchronicities. And I can't remember the author, but...
There have been many books about synchronicity. What I wanted to share with you is a synchronicity that happened to me this morning.
Uh-huh.
I got a comment from a viewer out of the blue who had obviously no idea that we had this interview scheduled today, our first interview, I think, in about 9 months. Mm-hmm. And this viewer sent a very, very lengthy post saying, you know, I wish somebody would ask Tom Campbell these questions.
Yes.
A long list of questions that this individual would like me to ask you. So I have some of them.
Oh, well, great. That's good. Yes, that's a synchronicity. Yeah. It just happens, and you wonder, what's the probability of that? Yeah. Just when you get this letter, I'm showing up the next day, you know.
Not the next day, the same day.
The same day. Yeah, well, my life is full of those as well. Uh-huh. And as you talk to people who are low entropy, who are sharing nice people, you'll find that they have synchronicities all the time as well, because they are engaged in the purpose of being here, which is to grow up, lower your entropy, move toward becoming love. And if you're doing it, it's like now you're playing the game. You're part of the process, and you get helped. You get the things you need, and your growth then speeds up. But if you're clueless, wandering around on the playing field, having no idea what the game is, then if a synchronicity was given to you, you'd look at it and say, I probably just made that up, or, yeah, that was just chance. You'd brush it off, and you wouldn't get the same thing out of it. It wouldn't make a connection for you. So if people who reject that, they don't get it. The system doesn't go out of its way to waste its time trying to help people who won't get it. Mm-hmm. So you can find some people who say, I've never had a synchronicity. What do you mean synchronicities? That's a lot of BS. If that's the case, then why don't I have any? Well, that's the reason. They can't learn from it, so they don't get it. You can learn from it, and it happens to you, and you go, right on schedule. Yes, here's the questions I'm asked to do. So sure, that'd be good to ask this guy's question.
Well, the first question he wanted to deal with had to do with, and I don't think you and I have ever discussed this, the idea that you, apparently in other talks, because I don't recall you mentioning it to me, have had some sort of communication with, I will call them non-human intelligence.
Well, yes, I have. Now, let's talk about these kind of experiences. Many people will call these out of body. And all that means is that it doesn't happen here. Mm-hmm. You know, it doesn't happen in your backyard or in your bedroom or whatever. It's someplace else that is more dreamlike. Mm-hmm. You know, your dreams don't happen here either. They're someplace else, some other reality of consciousness and awareness, and not here. Well, that's true. And I would say that most of the UFO and what do we call it, the ET experiences are experiences within consciousness. Yeah. The consciousness system is creating these experiences, and it's accelerating creating these experiences for a purpose. Mm-hmm. And the purpose is to blast people out of their ruts of thinking, what make them think about possibilities, a bigger reality than just us here, open minds. Because once you open mind, it's easier to shift that openness from here to here than it is to get it open in the first place. Opening the mind is the first hardest step. So the ET thing opens people's minds. And you see, the larger conscious system has always been saying, we have to grow up, we have to be kinder and gentler, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at the ET literature, you know, that people have been recording their conversations with aliens for 100 years. Yeah. You can go to Turkey, and there's a whole organization over there that's been going on for 50 years, and they have like 800 volumes of stuff that's been channeled from extraterrestrials. And what's the message? You humans are just too violent. You just have not grown up enough. You are always tearing at each other. You're fighting. You're squabbling. You just can't seem to get along. And until you grow up, you can't get into the galactical circle, which requires you to be much more grown up. It's the same message the LCS says. The galactical circle was just thrown in, as a prop for part of the ET thing. So it's the same message. You're violent, you got high entropy. They don't say that, but you're fighting, you're fussing. It's all about control, power, force. And what you really need to do is grow up and grow out of that. So I see the same message from the LCS as I see basically being collected from the ETs. And it's blasting people out of their mental rut to open their minds. And it's being fed right now because humanity has come to some very important decision points in the near future. And the people who are alive on the planet today will be the ones making these decisions. So the system is trying real hard to help us make the caring and loving and sharing decision rather than the de-evolving back into more control, power, and force. So, and the reason this has come now, why now, why us, is because of our technology. The Buddha could climb up on a rock, and if he spoke in a loud voice, maybe 100 people could hear what he said. Well, now we have a megaphone that's huge. We have an internet, and if somebody says something really amazing, 1 billion people will have it in 24 hours. So that's a pretty big megaphone. You don't have to have the Buddha wandering around with 20 people, for 30 years. You can change very quickly now. You can also de-evolve very quickly now, as well as evolve more quickly now. So it makes everything run faster. So we need to make some choices in the near future of which way we're going to go. Is it going to be toward love, or is it going to be toward fear? And that is coming to this kind of knife-edge point with fear on one side, love on the other. And which way are we going to choose it? And if we go to fear, then we're going to de-evolve. But eventually evolution just keeps chugging along. We'll eventually chug our way back up to where we are now. But it would be so much better if we made the choice toward evolution and toward kindness and sharing. So the system wants to give us the best probability. So right now, the ET thing is like booming. Business at the ET level is just booming, and people's minds are opening up, and that's a good thing. But also, it's booming other places too. It's booming in the Psy Games that are going to come up at the end of August. Trying to show people that there's more to our reality than just what the physicists have told you about. Look at these people and the things that they can do. By making it games, it makes it more interesting to people. Otherwise, they're not interested. And they come and see. Now they've seen it themselves. Then they take a course like we talked about, that I offer. They can actually experience it themselves, because everybody can do paranormal things. You don't have to be special to do that. It's just developing your intuitive side.
This is a course that we'll talk more about at the end of the interview, even though it's been pre-recorded.
Yes. So anyway, there's a lot of pushing going on from all sides to help people stand up and make the right choices at this time of where everything's condensed. Everything's jammed now because of what they call internet time, right? Everything moves faster. I mean, Homo sapiens have been evolving here for 200,000 years. That's just a guess of archaeologists. And it's been, if this is our evolution, and that's de-evolution, and this is time, then it's been not growing much. And we get a little bit here. We came maybe to cities, and a little bit here and a little bit here. But now we've gotten up to this part where everything happens really fast. Yep. And we have this opportunity to turn this curve and make great steps forward instead of tiny little steps forward. If you go back and look at the last 5 centuries, and every century from the 5 centuries ago to now, you'll see we've increased a little bit. We're more caring, we're more sharing, we're more helpful than we were. Life was really cheap 5 centuries ago. If you had power, you could kind of do anything you wanted to anybody you wanted to, and it just didn't matter. But we're not there anymore. So we have evolved, but they're little steps over centuries. Now we have an opportunity to accelerate that growth, but at the same time, we have that same force pushing us to fall off the other side. So that's the nature of just where we happen to be today. And like I say, people alive today will make those choices. Will we de-evolve and go backwards toward fear, or will we go forwards? And the larger conscious system is pushing every button it can to try to help us grow up and make the right decision. That's why, you see all the ET stuff just kind of blossoming in the last couple of years. And there was a time back in the 1800s when the paranormal things were blossoming. You had Madame Blavatsky and spiritualism, and that was part of it. Okay, the system knows this is coming along; it's part of it. And then you had the beginning of parapsychology. Make it in the university, because now it's acceptable, it's academic, and study that. But that was really hard getting traction in those fields, because the materialists say it's impossible. Don't even have to look at it. Don't need to see the research. Don't need to do anything, because I know it's impossible. Throw it out. And that's unfortunate. But we've been growing. We've been changing. Now, you look at all the physicists who are what we call particle physicists, and they'll all tell you that reality is information, because what they have learned is that if they bash atoms together into targets or into each other, and they see what pieces fall out. And what they've learned is that if they model these particles as little chunks of mass, let's say with charge, like an electron, they can't get the right answer. They cannot compute what comes out, because it's just wrong. That's not the way reality works. It isn't mass. It's not a mass-based. It's a probability-based reality. But if they model those particles as a point with the attributes of mass and the attributes of charge, that's just information. That's the way you model an electron in a computer simulation. So they will say, this is a computer simulation. They won't say this is a computer simulation, because they're afraid to say that, but they will say reality is information-based. Now, there's no way for reality to be information-based other than this is a virtual reality.
Now, before we get too deep, I want to go back to what the viewer really wanted to ask, because I haven't completed there.
All right.
We're just at the very tip top of a long list here. So what this viewer is trying to get at is, since you have acknowledged you have had communication with non-human intelligence, the viewer, and you've just reported a lengthy discourse about some of the things you've learned in that context. The viewer wants to know, how much of this did you derive from your own model? How much of it was communicated to you directly from an alien being? How much of it was communicated to you from the larger consciousness system? And how much of it might be pure speculation on your part?
Okay. Those are all good questions. And they're not all mutually exclusive of each other. Some of them can be, yes, this, and this. Okay. An out-of-body is just, you get a data stream. It's a single-player game. That's all there is to it. Larger conscious system sends you a data stream that defines a reality. It's not here. It's somewhere else. It's non-physical. And then you do the same thing. You get the data, you interpret it, and that's your reality. Now, the larger consciousness system also does things like fear tests to assess just where you are. Because if it knows where you are, it knows better how to help you take the next step. So I have had interactions with aliens. And when I say aliens, just think of this as a single-player game with a larger consciousness system. They're showing me aliens. And I've had probably 10 or 20 such experiences with aliens. Sometimes it's nice. I had a fear test with aliens where I ended up in what they call the alien abduction or some kind of thing. So I ended up being out on this bed, and there was things and stuff was going to cut and do whatever, sort of like a dissection, if you like, to find out how my body worked and so on. And it was a fear test. So if you go, and you scream and you fight and you have this big problem, then you fail the fear test.
How do you know it was a fear test?
I didn't know that until later, much later. I didn't know it was a fear test. So, but you have these things. I've made connections, and I was, like in non-physical space, and I get messages, and I get connections. So you run into beings there, and you talk with them. So that's kind of normal when you're in that space, is that you run into other entities. And sometimes you run into entities and you converse with them, and they'll tell you that they're in a spaceship. And would you like to come visit them? They can pull you in, but you have to agree to it. So you say, okay, and there you are. Okay, now all of this is a data stream from the larger consciousness system. It's giving me opportunities to make choices so that I will grow. Now, depending on how that conversation goes, it could be very friendly, it could be threatening, it could be diabolical. I've been in all of those. Friendly, diabolical, threatening, all of those kinds of things. Then you have these experiences with extraterrestrials, because that's what the system is giving you. These are extraterrestrials. You're in a spaceship, and you look around, sure enough, it looks like a spaceship. There's walls, there's people, there's doors, there's cabinets, there's strange-looking people, and you have these experiences. Single-player game, larger conscious system, giving me data that I interpret and have to react to, interact with. And by that, I'm evolving or de-evolving by how I interact with that. So if I interact with fear, well, then I'm de-evolving, because that's the way down. If I interact with caring or just with being careful or whatever, then maybe it's neutral, or maybe I get some points for it. But that's the thing. So yes, I've done that. I've been on the table with very threatening-looking things aimed at me and whatever, and even starting to do stuff. And in that particular time, I just let it happen. Figured there's nothing here that I can control, so just let it happen. And I was calm, and I was relaxed, and they did whatever they did, and then it goes away. Because I passed that test, so it's over.
It goes away?
The whole thing goes away. You're not on the table anymore. Suddenly you're back in Kansas. Because test over. So then it suddenly goes away. And
without any physical ramifications?
Without any physical ramifications. You're just getting a data stream to your mind. That's all. You're getting a data stream. Sometimes it doesn't end like that. Sometimes they land and you get off. And you walk down the stairs down to the ground, and now you have an opportunity. You can go hide someplace if you don't want to get back on, or you can get back on, or you can talk to them and tell them that I don't really want to go on. I'd like to, can you drop me off someplace? Or you can have this discussion, and these are choices you have, and you evolve or de-evolve according to these choices. So this virtual reality allows all kinds of things to happen because it's just a data stream. And you're given a lot of interesting, dramatic choices that you couldn't have here. You're not going to have that walking around with this rule set in this place. So you have them there.
Well, occasionally people do report things that seem to happen here, like changes to their body that occur after the experience of some sort of a surgical procedure on a spaceship.
Yes, I've heard those kinds of things too. And none of that surprises me. The tests can continue on even after you're here. If it's real, it's part of what's going on. How do you deal with that? What do you do? So these are situations in which you have very meaningful choices, and you get to make these choices, and by your choices you evolve or de-evolve. And they're generally picked for people who have a good probability of evolving from them. The system doesn't give you something so hard that you're likely to fail, but it's got to be challenging. If it's too easy, you don't learn much. So they have to pick something, and of course sometimes they're wrong, or sometimes the people freak out and act very badly, whatever. But those things happen. And the ET connection is just part of the library of things that you can do and that you can experience. You can also go to other worlds. You can go to other places, other reality frames. You can talk to people in the non-physical. So there's lots of things you can do, but all of it is a single-player game with a larger consciousness system.
Now, what do you mean by single-player game?
Well, this reality that we live in called the physical universe and all the humans that are here, that's a multiplayer game. Yeah. Multiplayer games are interactive. So if I do this, that affects others that are also in the game. Yeah. But a single-player game is just one person in the game. You know, in the video games, video games are often violent, and they'll call that a first-person shooter or something. Mm-hmm. You're the only one in the game, and it's you against whatever else the computer puts out there. Single-player game. Now, I have been out of body with another person. I think we talked about Dennis and I went out of body once and stayed together and had adventures together, and we were in isolated rooms and so on. And that was a double. It was a two-player game. Mm-hmm. Well, you can get some of those too. There's 2 and 3 and 5-player games that you can buy. It can make whatever it is that it thinks is most appropriate for you to grow up and challenge you in a way that you need to be challenged.
Well, is everything always a game of one sort or another?
It's all virtual. When I say game, that's just another word for virtual reality, because people think of virtual reality as a game. Right.
But what you're saying is that everything that we experience through our senses or through our imagination, through our consciousness, all of it is part of the virtual reality. All of it is a data stream coming from the larger consciousness system without exception.
Yeah, without exception. Consciousness is fundamental. Everything else is a derivative of consciousness. So you start with that idea. And I got to the idea that consciousness was fundamental because in all the things I did and the paranormal things I learned to do, I found that the arrow of causality always went from consciousness to the physical, never the other way. That makes consciousness more fundamental, and it makes consciousness prior to the physical more fundamental. So that idea is really, if I wanted to say, what is your model in a few words, I'd say the model is that consciousness is fundamental. That's basically the model. And once you say that, logic requires you from there to say, this is a virtual reality. Because if consciousness is fundamental, the only way you get this is through information. Consciousness is an information system. So if consciousness is fundamental, then this has to be a virtual reality. That's just that's taking a big step. There's 4 or 5 steps in that logical process, but one of them leads irrevocably to this conclusion that this is a virtual reality. And then it's trying to help the players evolve. So you have these situations. You have synchronicities. You have crop circles that show up overnight one day, and 20 acres of land has very precise mathematical curves on it. They would take 100 surveyors 2 weeks or more if they could do it at all, because they don't do curves very well. They're really good at straight lines, but they don't do curves. And walking around, if you had 100 surveyors in the field, it would be hard for them not to step anywhere, so on. So you look at it and you say, well, obviously, it's not done here. It's done elsewhere. And of course, people say, oh, it's aliens, but it's the larger consciousness system trying to open our mind and say, look, guys, reality is a lot different than you thought. See these things that you can't explain? Open your mind, think bigger thoughts. And that's been going on since Madame Blavatsky and all the rest of that crowd, and Rhine Institute and all of that's been part of this growing thing to get us to where we are now, which is this big decision that's going to happen in the next, decade?
So to answer the question from this viewer, it would seem that your model is so comprehensive that you can derive this idea from the model, and whether you get something comparable or even something contradictory from an alien or from a speculation of your part, it doesn't much matter. The model seems to take precedence.
Yes. Well, when I say it doesn't much matter where it comes from, that's true. And that's because the question, is it real? Did you imagine it? Is it real? Right? That's always the question.
That's sort of the underlying.
Yeah, that's the question. Well, the thing is, it's the wrong question. There's nothing more real than information.
Yeah.
From my model, information is as real as it gets. Everything is information.
Well, do you equate information with consciousness? I don't think so.
Consciousness system is an information system.
Right.
So we get this data stream, and that's real for us. Just like if we're playing World of Warcraft, where our elf runs around and the things the bosses he has to battle and so on, they seem to be real within that context. So it's the wrong question, is it real? The real question is, because it's irrelevant, it doesn't really matter where it comes from. The real question is, was it useful? Did you learn anything? Did you grow up any? Did something click into understanding that you didn't have before? That is what's important. And the things you get to your mind, okay, this is larger conscious system comes to you as consciousness. There's only 3 paths that can travel. 1, the larger conscious system can send you data. Some other consciousness can send you information because all consciousness is netted. And you can make stories up yourself because you're consciousness and you can create information. These 3 streams don't have tags on them that says this is from the LCS and this is from you. And
LCS being large
system. They don't come with tags on them. So you never are entirely sure. So that's another part of his question is going to be, well, how do you know? You say, well, you never know for sure. But with experience, they're very different sources. It's like if you talk to your Aunt Susie, who was into flowers and gardening, and then your Uncle George was into sports, and they both talk to you, but through some kind of voice synthesizer, so the voices sound exactly the same. It wouldn't take you very long talking to each one of them to decide which one was Susie and which one was George, right? You could figure that out very quickly. Well, it's like that. With experience, you can separate them pretty well. But do you ever know for sure 100%? No, you don't. The larger conscious system could pretend that it's, another consciousness. You don't know for sure, and you never will. But you can't let that stop you from moving forward. You don't need certainty to take the next step. All you need is logic, and you need to assess it, not, is this real? That's kind of a meaningless question. The question is, what did you learn? Is this valuable? How did you grow? How are you different now for having had that experience? So you have to think about those things. So I took my trip with the aliens, and I had one thing with the aliens where I did visit them in their ship 1 or 2 times, but then I started getting a vibe from them that was kind of disturbing. But I didn't know really why it was disturbing. It's just like, I don't trust them. And I had that, and my choice was to stop interacting with them. So I did. I stopped interacting with them. And occasionally they'd kind of knock on my door, and I would ignore it because that was my choice. Now, whether that was a good choice or a bad choice, I don't know. But it really doesn't matter. It's what did I learn through that? Well, I learned that just don't go willy-nilly along with anything. Just because it seems, we're aliens, we're good guys, we're coming to help you out. Just because you get all that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way it is. So when I started getting this negative vibe, I paid attention to it. First, I tested it a little bit, and I said, where's this coming from? Why? Is something bothering me? Am I making this up? Is it coming from them? Am I picking up on their negativity? Is this just, I don't know. But I analyze that the best I can. I come to a choice, and then I see how that choice worked out. And I think that the ignoring them from that point on was the right choice. Because after I did that for a while, it went away. Otherwise, things don't go away. They just change. You'll get the same lesson and the same choices, but a different context. And you just keep doing things until you figure out what the right answer is. So yes, all those things. So it just happens. That's a single-player game. Most out-of-bodies are single-player game. Dennis and I did a two-player game where we interacted together, and I suspect you could do others. But
I've done it in groups.
Yeah. But the logic conscious system has to serve that up. It has to serve you, say, a 10-player game. Okay. Well, it can do that if it thinks this is going to be a good learning thing. If it thinks, no, this is going to make a lot of people fearful, then it won't do it, and it won't work. And you'll try, but it'll never pull together because the system won't support it because it's concluded that it's going to do more harm than good.
But it's understandable that for a person who has had such an experience, it might occur out of the body, it might be in a dream, it might be in their backyard.
Right.
I've talked to people who have had all of that.
Right.
People are going to wonder, was that real or not?
Yeah. Right. Wrong question. Yeah, is that real? It's information. That's as real as it gets. There isn't anything more real than information. So yes, you're sitting out on your back porch and having a barbecue, and an alien ship comes and lands in your yard, and it makes big indentations in your lawn, and now that grass wherever it touched down was hot, and you get big burn spots there, and aliens get out and come eat barbecue with you or something, whatever it is, it takes place, and then the alien ship goes away, and you're left with the divots and the burn spots. And you take pictures of them and cameras, and you do all that kind of stuff. Or you even take pictures of the aliens themselves, perhaps. But that's just an experience. That's the data stream that you got. That was intended to kick you out of your mental rut, to help you get out of the box that you've been trapped in most of your life in a material reality that is so buttoned down and nothing that unusual happens. Open your mind. Think bigger thoughts. So those will happen. And yes, there's divots in the grass, and you take pictures of them all, and you show pictures. And everybody out there who hasn't had that experience said, yeah, it probably took him a long time with a blowtorch to burn that grass. They won't believe you. They think you make it up. You made the divots. The whole thing's a hoax. And they throw it away and ignore it because they know that it's probably not real. That's the reaction that you'll get. So even though that's proof for you because it happened to you, it's not proof for anybody else, because if it didn't happen to them, if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. And that is just the way it works.
It's changing, though. We're in an environment now where you will find a community of people who will support you.
Yes, that's true. And we're doing a lot better with that.
You were recently at the Contact in the Desert with 5,000 people, and I had some visitors who explained to me that half the people there believe they had past lives on other planets.
Yeah, that's probably true. But most of the people there that I bumped into and talked to were thinking, rational people who had personal experiences, most of them, that led them to believe that reality like we think it is not the way it is, whether that was aliens or something else. And they were seekers. They were trying to find out, what does this mean? What's going on? And sometimes they make up stories because this is the way humans are. Something happens that you don't understand. You try hard to make up a story that explains it. And you do your best. You take your time and you make up the story. And when you first make it up, you realize you just made that story up. But that's your best explanation. A month later, that's not a story. That's the facts. That's what happened. The story, which was your best guess, turns into a fact. And that's just the way people are. So we have lots of stories, but the stories, to me, when somebody tells me a story like that, it's not to me as, was that real or was that not real? It's, I assume that they're telling the truth. That's what they experienced. They experienced that because it's in their data stream. They can experience anything. So I believe them that they had that experience. Now, exactly what it meant, and was it little green people who were from Saturn, or was it just little green people that were in the data stream, just trying to help wake them up? I don't go there. It doesn't matter. It's what did you learn from that? What do you walk away with from having had that experience. What do I walk away with when talking to somebody who had that experience? Well, I'll walk away with an understanding that, geez, there's thousands of people here who've had experiences like that. This is a very common thing. So I get some understanding about what's going on out there in the world and how common it is. They get something else from their experience. And it's what do you learn and how important is what you learn? What can you do with it? How can you use that information? So that's, so the things he said, was it this way or that way or the other? It's kind of all of that. It's kind of all of that. And you never know for sure. No. How do you know for sure that's true? You don't, because you don't know which one of the three, and often it's a combination of all three. You get something from the LCS, you make stuff up to add to that, and maybe somebody else is involved in it as well. It could be any kind of a mixture of those three, or it could be either one of those three purely. You don't know for sure. But with time, you can tell the LCS from somebody else or from yourself, because they have just very different characteristics of the way they function, the way they sound, the things they do. And you can separate them fairly easily with experience, but never are you 100% sure of anything, which is why I tell people you have to be skeptical of everything, because you have to live gracefully with uncertainty.
And this would apply, I think, across the board to anything related to the paranormal, and probably lots of things that we would call normal. I mean, reincarnation, spirit guides.
Sure, all of that. Absolutely. It's the same thing. If a spirit guide is going to help you grow up, well, all you have to do is ask for one, and there it is. It's something. But if it's not, if you're just playing games and you want to, see how smart your spirit guide is or something like that, and you're not really serious about growing up, then you probably can't get anybody to play with you. You just doesn't work for you. You don't get one. But if you really can use one, then you will get one, or two, or three. It doesn't have to be one, and you will dress them up. You'll make them male and female. You do all the kind of things that we do to make it fit our experience. And then your story will grow from there.
Well, Tom, in conclusion, are there some final thoughts you'd like to share?
So we're up to conclusion time already, I see.
We've been going for a while.
Yeah, okay. Well, thoughts to share would be, people think, well, it's a virtual reality, then it doesn't really count. Like they do that when they play these video games where they run over people and do horrible things. What is that? This is anyway, some of them are very, they're very violent and so on. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter because it's just a game. Well, that is not the case here. This game matters more than anything else that you will ever do. This determines whether you evolve or de-evolve. Now, why is that important? Because if you evolve, your life will be full of joy and peace and happiness and everything you need, whether it's money or whether it's, a person to have a relationship with. It'll show up just as you are ready for it. If you're ready for it, if you're ready to grow in that way, then it'll show up. And your life will be very productive. You will understand things and your life will be good. And if, on the other hand, if you de-evolve, you will constantly be in a struggle. You'll struggle with life. You just have this barrier. And if you could get over that barrier, if you just got that promotion, everything would be great. Well, whether you get it or not, everything won't be great. There's always another barrier and another barrier. And okay, you got the promotion, but now you have trouble with your significant other, and that's a problem. And your life will be constant struggle. And you will eventually kind of think that, what am I doing here? And life is just not fun. It's hard. It's miserable. I'm unhappy. My life has been full of unhappiness. That's because you're making choices on the side of fear. That generates a very unhappy, miserable life. And as long as you keep making those choices, your life will just keep getting more and more miserable as you grow. So it matters a lot whether you evolve or de-evolve. If you evolve, then life is sweet. If you de-evolve, life is very hard and very difficult and punishing. So, it's like your choice. Which one of those would you rather have? It seems rather obvious that taking the time and trouble to assess every choice you make, what's the low entropy choice here? What's the choice that will help the most people for the longest time? What do you do? And it's not big choices I'm talking about. It's little choices. Okay? It's your turn to do the dishes. It's a choice. So you say, okay, I'll do them. And you're happy to do them because, it's important. Somebody has to do them, and it might as well be you. So you do it cheerfully, and you do a really good job of it. You even clean things off those dishes that have been there for months, that somebody else didn't actually clean that thoroughly. And you do a good job, and you feel good about it. Or you could say, again, I have to do them again? Why me? I did them last week. And you can feel sorry for yourself. You can blame other people for abusing you. You can have a very negative attitude toward it. It's just a simple thing, doing the dishes. So your life is full of choices that you get to make. And you get to make them on the side of love or the side of fear. Fear is, I'm being abused. I've done more dishes than you have, so you should do them. I don't want to have to do more dishes than you do, you see. That's fear that somebody else might get something that you don't have or get away with something that you don't get away with. That's fear. So you make those choices. They're self-centered, and they will lead you to a life that's very unpleasant for the most part. So that's important. And every reality you're in, whether it's a dream reality, a daydream reality, a single-player game in an out-of-body or a multiple-player game here in this universe that is a virtual reality, it doesn't matter. Every place that you make choices is a place where you evolve and de-evolve. So if you think in your dreams you can do all kinds of things that aren't nice, all of those are just the same as if you did them here as far as your evolution. In dreams, the neat thing is that you actually act the way you are. Here, you act the way you think other people, the way you want other people to see you. But in dream reality, the real you comes out and is the actor. So if you do things that aren't nice in dreams, that's because, that not niceness is what's inside of you. And if you do things that are very nice and helpful in dreams, because that's inside of you. So dreams become important to keep track of those and understand. They'll show you a lot about your progress. So anyway, what would I tell people? I tell people it's important. Always the most important thing you can do is make a low entropy choice. You don't have to always be right. People say, well, how do I know whether it's low entropy or not? Well, you won't know for sure. Again, you don't know anything for sure. You have to live gracefully with uncertainty. You just make your best choice. Then you try to learn from it. And then you make your next best choice and you try to learn from it. And that's how you evolve or de-evolve. If you don't learn from it, you get to do it again until you do learn from it. So that's what life is all about. And if enough of us understand that, this world will turn into a very pleasant place to live. Everybody will be able to optimize their own personal needs, their personal things that they want to do. It's not this collective. Oh, this collective thing's obvious, terrible, because you have leaders that run up, tell everybody else what to do. No, everybody is there because they want to help you. And if you say, I'm really tired of doing brain surgery, I'd like to write poetry, they will try to adjust things such that your position into brain surgery is covered by somebody else, and your opportunity to write poetry will come to you. The whole system will shift to give you. So it's not that you have less personal freedom. You have more personal freedom in that sense. A lot of people get really scared by the collective. Oh, we're all being nice together. Oh, that always turns out to be, somebody gets to be in charge. But no, if somebody's in charge telling everybody else what to do, that's high entropy. We're talking about a low entropy society where everybody tries to help everybody else optimize what they want to become and who they are and their choices. And other people are trying to optimize your choices. So it's a very supportive system. So it does matter. Everything matters. Every choice you make, even the simple choices as to whether or not you hang your clothes up at night or whether you throw them on the floor. Everything you do matters. So be aware. Try to be better than you are. It's about growth. You don't have to be perfect. Making mistakes is actually good. It gives you an opportunity to grow. So, well, I shouldn't say it's actually good making mistakes, but you can learn from it. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. You just learn from it. So that's the important thing that I would leave people with. It's not about, is that real? Nothing is more real than information. If you got that in a dream, that's real. If you got that in and out of body, that's real. If you saw that spaceship land in your yard, or that you had a radar that saw this thing go Mach 2 and then do a 90-degree turn and never slow down, that's real. People see those things. And they're meant to see those things. Those things are created for people to see, to help crack open minds. You have the people who have the near-death experiences. They're given those experiences, so they'll write a book, particularly if they're very credible, like a neurosurgeon. You write a book, and now 1 million people have their minds cracked open a little bit because this neurosurgeon says the brain doesn't really do anything. It happens outside the brain. Okay, he's a neurosurgeon. He's not supposed to say things like that. So it opens people's minds. So that's why he got that near-death experience, because it's part of us being nudged to wake up. So just do the best you can. Learn from what you do. Have a lot of fun. Fun is part of it. This is not a salt mine that you're plugging away in. This thing about lowering entropy, if it's that, you're doing it wrong. You have to have fun. You have to enjoy it. Doing things for people and seeing that it's helping them is what gives you that joy. That's what you feel good about. The fact that you would sneak cookies out of the jar isn't what's fun. It's helping people that's fun. And your life just should always be fun. You should not throw away your childhood. That 5-year-old and that 10-year-old are still in there, and you should celebrate them sometimes. Sometimes just do silly things, play, enjoy, be full of humor. That's important. If you get too serious, get yourself wrapped up in too much serious, you will probably end up chasing your tail in circles and not actually get anywhere. You're much better off just to be who you are, be real, be, authentic, and see how that plays. If it doesn't play well, then change who you are. That's not necessarily easy, but it can be done with persistence. So that's kind of life and the way it works. That's why you're here. So that would be kind of the summary of it. All the details really don't matter so much, but if you understand that, then you'll do the right thing at the right time. And whether you understand the logic behind it or the model or anything else is really not important. What's important is that you try your best to do the right thing at the right time, in the right way.
I'm speechless. That's so profound, Tom. Thank you so much for visiting me here in Albuquerque and sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, your insights, and your knowledge with me and with the New Thinking Aloud audience. It's a joy and an honor to be with you.
Well, thank you very much. I am glad to be here. I'm hoping that some people will listen to this and say, oh, that makes sense. And the more people that move toward becoming love and let go of control, power, force, the sooner it's going to be a nicer place for all of us. So that's sort of my mission, is to say that. And what I bring to the table is basically a coherent story. Because you can tell a story about this kind of paranormal thing and then a story about that consciousness and quantum physics, and you can tell all these separate stories. But this is one coherent story that information is what is real. Larger consciousness system is an information system. We're pieces of consciousness, and we are here experiencing and making choices in a virtual reality. And if you get that, everything else is explained. It's perfectly coherent. So this guy said, how do you know? And how do you know that you're not making it up and all the rest of this? And there's very simple logical answers to all of that once you get the big picture. So if there's anything about this theory that is significant and important, is its coherence. It answers all the questions in a logical, straightforward way. And I haven't yet found anything that it doesn't answer in that straightforward, logical way. So I think that in the next several years, I hope, maybe within the next decade anyway, this idea will become the next big discovery, the next big, what do we call it, paradigm. The next big paradigm shift in physics, in science, that they will see that this is better physics. It describes all the things that they don't understand now without any new assumptions, without any logical problems. And once that happens, the physicists are the high priests now. They tell everybody else what to think. When they think that this is a good idea, the ball will start rolling downhill, or the snowball will start rolling downhill, gaining size and momentum. And that's all it'll take. After that, just give it another decade and this will be a very nice place. So that's my goal, is to help the physicists get to this new paradigm, which is logical and provides us a way to a kinder, gentler space to live in.
Who could ask for anything more?
Yes, so my purpose is to talk to people like you, and you will share this with other people, and some people will find value in it, and a lot of people will shrug and say, sounds crazy to me, virtual reality. Nah, this stuff's hard, it's not virtual, but that's the way it is for any virtual reality. My barbarian does the same thing. He picks up rocks and throws them, and they break windows. That physicality is just the nature of a virtual reality. But some people will take it and will grow with it, and that's all the payment I need for spending hours and hours and hours, talking about it, is that some people will pick it up and it will solve problems that they're having. That's the whole point, and that's why you do what you do.
Exactly.
You do that for the exact same reason. They go to podcasts, and that's why they have this podcast. It's because they're trying to help people learn. And there's thousands, tens of thousands of us doing this, and we can't get it done individually. We can only get it done if we all do our own part and do our best to help people take a small step forward. So I appreciate the opportunity to be part of your work, and that means a lot to me. It's one more opportunity to help people understand reality to a point that their life gets better.
Well, you will be welcome back over and over again. I'm happy to have as many conversations with you as we can fit in, because I would say 99% in concurrence with your point of view, and I think it is coherent. It's very valuable, not only intellectually valuable, but it's valuable at the level of the heart, at the level of the emotions, at the level of action that people take and the choices in their lives. And it's valuable for people sociologically as well. So I'm happy to continue in a small way to be an evangelist for you.
Well, I thank you. That's wonderful, because you have a very long and deep reach, and I appreciate being a part of that, and you allowing me to come here and speak to you. Whether this is number 9 or number 10, I guess we'll find out later.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's my privilege and pleasure to be here, and I'll be willing to do this again and again. unless it happens very soon, I probably won't be here to sit in this room in your own studio, but we can do it over Zoom, and it will be about 90%, the same. Mm-hmm. It just won't, the graphics won't be as good. It'll be a little less quality, and, the sound won't be as good, and the pictures won't be as good, but they're good enough. Yeah. It's not about how good is your cinematography. It's the message that you deliver, and Zoom can deliver the message just as well.
Well, thank you once again, Tom. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at CIHS.edu. You can now download all 9 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.